In a small village surrounded by towering mountains and thick forests, there lived a young man named Kale. He was the son of a warrior, and from the time he could walk, his father had instilled in him the belief that strength was the measure of one's worth. Kale's father, a man of formidable strength and honor, taught him how to fight and how to stand tall in the face of adversity. But Kale was different. He did not share his father's passion for battle and conquest. Instead, he found solace in quiet contemplation, in watching the sun rise over the mountains or listening to the wind rustling through the trees. Despite Kale's calm nature, he always felt a sense of disconnection from his father. He could see the disappointment in his eyes when Kale struggled with the physical training or when his heart wandered toward the mysteries of the world instead of the art of war. His father's love for him was undeniable, but Kale often wondered if that love was conditional on him becoming the warrior his father had always envisioned. As the years passed, Kale's sense of internal conflict grew. On the outside, he wore a mask of composure, always polite, always kind, but within him lay a darkness, an emptiness that he could not name. It was not the kind of darkness that could be seen, but something deep inside him that gnawed at his soul. He felt unworthy, as if he would never be enough for his father or anyone else. And yet, he had no one to talk to about this inner turmoil. His village was full of strong, practical people, and Kale did not think they would understand. One evening, as Kale wandered into the forest to escape the expectations of the village, he came across an ancient temple hidden behind thick vines. The stones were weathered, and the air felt dense, like the place had been forgotten by time. It seemed like a place of mystery, and Kale was drawn to it. Inside, there was a large mirror, cracked and covered in dust. As he approached it, something strange happened. The reflection staring back at him was not his own. The man in the mirror was dark, his eyes hollow and full of sorrow, his face marked by years of regret. Kale recoiled, confused, but the reflection spoke to him. "You know who I am. I am the darkness within you, the part of you that you hide from the world. The fears, the doubts, the unspoken pain." Startled, Kale backed away from the mirror. His heart raced, but he could not tear his eyes away from the shadowy figure that had somehow come to life. "Why do you haunt me?" Kale asked, his voice trembling. "You've spent your whole life trying to escape me, but I am a part of you. I am the silence you feel when you're alone. I am the weight of your father's unspoken expectations. I am the emptiness you cannot fill. You cannot run from me. You can only face me." Kale, unable to respond, stumbled out of the temple and into the cold night. The words of the reflection haunted him. He tried to push them aside, but they echoed in his mind, louder with each passing day. His nights were filled with restlessness, and his days became increasingly difficult to navigate. His father noticed his unease, but chose not to comment. Perhaps he thought it was just a phase, something Kale would grow out of, but Kale knew it was something deeper, something he could not ignore. Days turned into weeks, and Kale could no longer bear the weight of the darkness within him. He realized that he needed to understand what it was, to confront it, and perhaps even accept it. With a heavy heart, he returned to the temple, determined to face the reflection in the mirror. As Kale stood before the mirror once again, he found himself not filled with fear, but with an overwhelming sense of sadness. The reflection spoke, its voice now softer, almost compassionate. "You've come back. You are ready to listen, aren't you?" Kale nodded, though his hands trembled. "What do you want from me?" he asked. The reflection seemed to reach out toward him. "I do not want anything from you, Kale. I am not your enemy. I am the part of you that you have denied for so long. The fears, the doubts, the shame, they are not your burden to carry alone. They are a part of your human experience. But you cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge." Kale felt tears welling in his eyes. He had never allowed himself to feel this vulnerable. The realization was painful, but it also brought a strange sense of relief. He had spent his life running from his fears, trying to outshine them, to be someone he was not. But now he understood that it wasn't the darkness that defined him, it was how he chose to relate to it. The reflection continued, "Do not fear me. Fear is a barrier you create to protect yourself, but it also keeps you trapped. Accept me, and you will find strength in your vulnerability. When you stop running, you will discover that the darkness holds wisdom you cannot find in the light alone." Kale closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. In that moment, he let go of the need to be perfect. He embraced the darkness, not as a force of destruction, but as a source of understanding. The weight inside him lightened, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. When Kale returned to his village, the change was unmistakable. He carried himself differently, no longer burdened by the weight of unspoken expectations. His father, though initially confused by Kale's transformation, eventually saw the wisdom in his son's newfound calm. He began to understand that strength was not just about physical prowess, but also about emotional resilience. Kale's journey was not one of eradicating the darkness, but of accepting it as a part of who he was. He learned to live with it, to allow it to teach him lessons about compassion, understanding, and self-acceptance. As the years passed, Kale became a teacher in his own right, guiding others in the village who struggled with their own inner battles. He taught them that darkness was not an enemy to be fought, but a part of the human experience that could be transformed into wisdom. One day, as Kale grew old, he sat beneath the same trees where he once wandered as a boy, his heart full of peace. The darkness within him, no longer a weight, had become a quiet companion, one that reminded him of his humanity and the strength that came from embracing all parts of oneself.